Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast. That is, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here on Potomac Watch with Elliot Kaufman and Joe Sternberg. Joe, let's move to the IAEA censure resolution on Iran midweek here, late Wednesday. Its governing body issued a censured IAEA in a resolution offered by Britain, France, and I believe also Germany, for not cooperating, for banning certain inspectors, the one that knows something about the uranium program, and for not allowing adequate inspections of where the agency suspects there's evidence of enriched uranium beyond the levels that are allowed under the 2015 Accord. The United States, according to press reports, and I believe this to be true, had lobbied the three European governments not to offer this censure resolution because, again, it fears a backlash potentially in Iran, and it wants all of this calmed down before Election Day. But to their credit, the Europeans offered it anyway. And the U.S. did go along in the end, which would have been embarrassing if it hadn't. So they almost had to once the Europeans decided to do so. And it's interesting, Joe, that the Europeans decided to do this because this means that they are really concerned about what's going on in Iran.
Yeah, so the backstory here is that as all of this instability has been unfolding in the Middle East in recent years, and especially since October 7th, Iran has been ambling its way toward nuclear weapons. The latest news from the IAEA was we believe that Iran has enough uranium enriched to a point where it could very quickly go that last step to have enough for, I think it was somewhere between 3 and 5 nuclear warheads. So we are much closer to Iran having the bomb than we've ever been before. And this, again, is creating a major diplomatic problem for the Biden administration, which has been very keen to try to revive the Obama-era negotiations with Iran to basically pay them off by lifting sanctions in response in exchange for a promise they may or may not keep to give up this nuclear program. And the Europeans had been participants in those negotiations during the Obama era, have often tried to keep the dream alive, even when the Trump administration was resistant. But it's becoming clear that the situation is too much even for them. They are anxious about a situation where Iran is continuing to make this kind of progress, is not living up to obligations to allow in inspectors from the IAEA. And remember, the Europeans really do believe in nuclear non-proliferation efforts through multilateral bodies like the IAEA. So there's an interest on their part in actually trying to put their foot down in defense of some of those broader principles that they hold.
Of course, a censure resolution strongly condemning, as the words put it, the Iranian lack of cooperation. It doesn't have any teeth. It doesn't have any enforcement mechanism. China and Russia opposed the resolution, and presumably those countries would continue to do nothing to help pressure Iran on the nuclear program. So you'd have to get the U.S. to agree to sanctions, to enforce the current sanctions, and maybe to enforce much greater sanctions, Elliot. And then there's the possibility, which I think the U.S. administration fears, which is how does Iran respond? It denounced the resolution in a statement from the foreign ministry. Not surprisingly, it always does so. But does it trigger more of its proxies to hit back at either Israel or the United States, or as it turns out, the Houthis in the Red Sea on commercial shipping, which they've continued to do? And I think in particular, let's talk about the north of Israel and the skirmishing that has picked up this week in the north between Hezbollah and Israel.
So just to set the scene in the north, Hezbollah has fired around 4,000 rockets, missiles, mortars at Israel. It has depopulated the entire north of Israel.
This is since October 7th?
Since October 7th, exactly. It's kind of unbelievable to think that for, 8 months now, this whole region of Israel, people can't live there because it's constantly under fire. I mean, do you think if Florida was uninhabitable because someone was shooting at it for month after month, after the summer, the school year is going to start up again. Will children be able to go back home and go to their schools? this has just been allowed to drag on and drag on. And still, people talk about it as a low-intensity conflict. Why do they say that? Because they know that it could get an awful lot worse. And so Hezbollah has been stepping it up lately. And the question is why? Some people think it has to do with this ceasefire deal in Gaza, which is on the table. Maybe it wants to put more pressure on Israel. Maybe it wants to allow Hamas to hold out and say no. Another reason is Israel is finishing up in Rafah. And so once the main fighting in Gaza is over, is Israel going to turn north and finally deal with this problem on the northern front? Hezbollah may want to get ahead of that before Israel has kind of avoided the prospect of a two-front war.
And what are the chances that Israel will take some action? Because they don't want a two-front war. Obviously, it stretches Israel. On the other hand, Israel really can't continue with a no-go zone in its north. That is intolerable politically, I assume, in Israel, not to mention the fact that if it tolerates it, there is likely to be a conclusion in Lebanon that you can continue this and maybe advance it in a way that further pressures Israel.
I think it's likely that there will be a more serious fight, a larger fight with Lebanon. I'm not sure right now. I think Israel would like to finish off in Rafah first and then get there. I mean, an Israeli senior official told me that the big disagreement with the U.S. here on the northern front is that America's goal is to avoid war. Israel's goal is to get its people home. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. If it takes war to make Israel safe again, there will be war.
All right. And on that note, we will end for today. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Elliot. Thank you all for listening. We're here every day on Potomac Watch. And please join us again tomorrow and in the future. Thanks for listening.